I've done this before. You know I like wrestling. You know I like wrestling games. And we are just days away from the start of Wrestlemania season and the Royal Rumble. Hello there, welcome to Saber Duel Gaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to our retro review of WWF Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo. In many ways, WWF Royal Rumble was where the modern wrestling games truly began to take form. As expected, it would boast an updated roster, including Bret the Hitman Hart, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Randy Savage, Crush, and Lex Luger. The SNES version of the game also included exclusive characters Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect, Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna, and Tatanka. While the Genesis version would include Hulk Hogan, the rest of that exclusive roster was far from what the SNES had to offer. The game featured a whole host of new additions that hadn't been seen in a lot of the previous WWF or other wrestling games. You had a strength meter, an on-screen grapple meter, you had steel chairs outside that could be used as weapons. Other illegal tactics such as choking were allowed, as well as signature finishing moves, and of course, as we'll talk about later, for the first time ever in a home console, the Royal Rumble match itself. By modern standards, the variety of match types seen in this would probably seem really limited, but for the time, it was exceptional. Obviously, there was one-on-one matches with two wrestlers facing off against each other that were a standard one-fall match. This included a referee in the ring that would disqualify you if you used the steel chair or any other illegal moves. So you had to run into and knock the referee down in order to be able to do this, which was a great deal of fun. You could also choose a brawl match in which there was no referee. These matches couldn't be won by a pinfall. Instead, you could use anything you wanted. There was no countouts, no pinfalls, and it ended when one person's health meter was beaten down to oblivion. We also had tag team matches in which you could have two players playing against each other with their own tag teams or teaming up on the same side. Again, this was a first as far as I'm aware. There was a single or tag team tournament mode as well, which was effectively your one-player version of the game. It wasn't really a tournament, instead you just worked through the entire roster until you'd eliminated everybody, at which point you'd get a cute little cutscene that declared you the champion, or you and your friend as a tag team, the champions. There was also the strangely named triple tag team match. This wasn't actually a three-way tag team match, however. This was what would now be called a six-man tag, with three people on each team. Still, just another addition to the type of games you could play. But let's be honest, we're here for one thing, the Royal Rumble match itself. And the game was still limited as to how many people it could fit in the ring at any one time. However, it did manage to fit up to 6 people in. What would happen was you would start with 2, and regular intervals another wrestler would enter until 6 people filled the ring. After this point, every time someone was eliminated, usually by just being hip-tossed over the top rope, another wrestler would come down and join the fray, until only one person was left standing, the Royal Rumble winner. So how was this 16-bit gem viewed on the date of its release? Not really much to say here. The game garnered rather consistent scores of the mid-80s, ranging from 82 to 86. There was one anomalous score from Super Control that gave it 70%, but I'm willing to wager they're just not particularly big fans of wrestling. And whilst yes, this is the Super Nintendo version I'm reviewing, it's probably worth throwing out there that the Genesis version of the game garnered pretty much exactly the same scores. There wasn't a great deal of difference in the quality between the two games, so just to put that out there. Whilst wrestling games would take massive leaps forward across the 32 and 64-bit consoles, this in many ways was where they really started to be a little bit more inventive, creative, and really personalised the games to fans of professional wrestling. But then, what about modern scrutiny? How does this game hold up now? Okay, let me be really honest from the get-go. Wrestling games are not the easiest ones to stand up to that whole modern scrutiny concept, because there's at least one new WWF game released every single year, not to mention games released for ECW, WCW, TNA and AEW at different points across the history. Each of those games take massive steps forward, or in some cases backwards, that really leave the 16 and certainly the 8-bit versions of wrestling games quite far behind. However, I have really fond memories of this game. This was the first time I remember playing a wrestling game and truly enjoying it because the game was good, not because I liked wrestling and therefore was willing to suffer through the experience. Going and playing it now, it's still fun to play. It is really easy to pick up and get into. Part of that's because of how simple it is. You're mostly limited to a few Irish whips, stomps, headbutts, punches, and the occasional actual wrestling move. The character designs are still very identifiable and look pretty damn good for 16-bit graphics, although the fact that Yokozuna, who's meant to be about 500 to 600 pounds, is clearly the same size as Ric Flair, with a little bit of shading to make him look chubbier, doesn't quite stand up as much as the others. But as a lover of wrestling, this was the first time I was presented with the option to use that steel chair, the opportunity to knock the referee down and cheat, and of course the opportunity to enter the Royal Rumble match itself. That is a massive win. Some games stand the test of time because they're just as good now as they were then, and nothing has ever really eclipsed them. Other games don't quite have that. Instead, you go back and play them again and you realise why you enjoyed it at the time. Would a modern wrestling game fan who never played this before enjoy it so much? Probably not. It'd probably be quite painful and not a great deal of fun for them at all. But for someone who played it back then and went back to experience it now, I think you'd still find it to be quite the win. So, what do we score in this game? Overall, I can't pretend this game is as good now as it was then. There's been too many massive leaps forward. But it's still decent, and a rating of 6.5 out of 10 is probably about fair. Sometimes that score's a bit of an insult, but not in this occasion. But what do you think? Did you play this game? Comment below, let me know. And until next time, take the high ground.